In this video, I'll show you the base CSS I start every project with. We'll add a browser reset, define variables with root, and walk through the styles I use to keep things consistent and responsive. First, I always use a browser reset called Normalize. Normalize CSS helps smooth out browser inconsistencies without wiping everything out. Normalize will preserve browser defaults. It will make things more consistent, like heading sizes, margin spacing, and the likes. It also corrects weird browser-specific differences, like how buttons behave or how certain HTML5 elements are rendered. Browser behavior has become way more predictable in the last decade, but Normalize still catches many edge cases. Next, I set box sizing border box on every element, including pseudo elements, and this is to avoid layout bugs and make consistent sizing across the entire page. Box sizing border box makes your layout way more predictable. It means that padding and borders stay inside the width you set instead of adding to it. Without it, an element with a width of 300 pixels might end up larger than 300 pixels once you add padding or borders, and that can break your layout. Think of a box that stays the same size no matter how much padding you add inside. That's what border box gives you. Next, we're going to use the root selector to define reusable values like colors, spacing, or font sizes, and then we can use those throughout our CSS. It also makes updates a lot easier. You can change the value in root and it will update everywhere. This follows a really common coding principle called DRY, which stands for don't repeat yourself. And really, it just means write things once, reuse them when you can. And we're going to actually go ahead and add that to the very top of our style sheet. And I like to define just a handful of traditional colors to get started, but once you have your color palette, you can add all the colors and all the values that you want to reuse here. So first I'm going to add white. I'm going to add a light gray. I'm going to add just a regular gray. And I'm going to add a black. But I never use pure black. I usually just use a really, really dark kind of charcoal gray. Just remember that you always want to keep that at the very, very top of your CSS style sheet. Next, I'm going to add some base body styles. First, I'll start with padding 0, margin 0. And this is mostly about removing inconsistent browser defaults, especially the default margin around the body element. You don't need to zero out margin and padding on every element, just the body. Other elements get handled case by case or with Normalize or a custom browser reset. Next, go ahead and add a font family, and you can add anything, but I think to get started, add something generic like a sans serif font. I'm using Arial Helvetica sans serif, and this is called a font stack. So the browser is first going to look for Arial. If it can't find it, it will use Helvetica. If it can't find that, it is going to use the default sans serif font to render the fonts. Next, I'm going to use Font Optical Sizing Auto. This lets variable fonts like some versions of Helvetica adjust the font's shape and weight depending on the size. It is supported in modern browsers and it makes your text look more natural. It's definitely not required, but it's a nice enhancement if you're using variable fonts. Next, I'm going to set a font weight of 400 and a font style of normal. Then we set a font size of 100%. 100% sets the root font size to the browser default, which is usually 16 pixels. That means that 1 rem will equal 16 pixels, which keeps things predictable and scalable. It also respects user settings for accessibility, which is a best practice. Next, I always set a line height of 1.65. Setting line height as a unitless number is the recommended approach. It means 1.65 times the font size, whatever that may be. Unitless line height scales naturally with inherited font sizes, so it avoids layout bugs when elements change size. Next, I set a color of black, which indicates that all text, unless otherwise specified, will be black. And I always set a background color of white on the body. Leaving out a background color can mean that if your user has a different setting and you haven't specifically set the color, it can change the color of your site. So just go ahead and set the background color to white, and then you can change other sections throughout your site as needed. Next, I write a few basic styles to handle all images. First, I always say display block. By default, images are display inline, and I find that they behave much better when they are set to display block. Then I set everything to max width 100% and height auto. This keeps images responsive. When you use these styles, images will scale down to fit their container, they won't stretch, and they won't overflow. This makes sure that your images stay proportional as screen sizes change. Next, I like to write some base styles for paragraph tags. By default, paragraphs get margin on the top and the bottom. I change it so there's only margin on the bottom. I also like to use a pseudo class called last of type. This means that on the last paragraph, there is no margin on the top or the bottom. These are the styles that I use to start every project. Feel free to use them, modify them, and make them your own. Happy coding!